the Weekly Sceptic, episode 86, back at the Westminster Podcast Studio. I'm Nick Dixon here with Scourge of the BBC, Toby Young, and coming up this week, Humza Useless quits, a Tory MP defects to Labour, and Ireland wants to send its migrants back to us, plus peak woke, and of course paid content for all our brilliant subscribers on basedmedia.org. But Toby, I thought we'd kick off with old Humza. He's gone. It's a white pill for many people, to use one of his terms, white. So what did you make of his resignation speech? He cried a little bit, which I thought was a bit off. He went on about his race as if that was a big thing and very important. He said that somehow this was vindication of multiculturalism, that there was him and Sunak and all these other useless leaders, which I saw as a bit of a non sequitur. And then he was off. And the reason, of course, was the failed coalition with the Greens, or rather his withdrawal from the coalition, the Butte House coalition with the Greens. What did you make of it all?
Well, his resignation speech, what was slightly odd about it is that he said, in his concluding remarks just before the waterworks began, he said, "I am also grateful and blessed for having the opportunity afforded to so few to lead my country, and who could ask for a better country to lead than Scotland?" Is this the Scotland that is structurally racist? Is this the Scotland in which all the most senior figures are white? Is this the Scotland in which white working class men, particularly those from underprivileged communities, are cesspits of hate speech? And he even went on to more or less say that. He said, Scotland should be really proud of the strides we've taken to tackle inequality, prejudice and determination, but added, let's also acknowledge that far too often in our country, hatred continues to rear its ugly head. In a world where every issue seems to descend into a toxic culture war. That's rich, isn't it? Coming from the white. every issue seems to descend into a toxic culture war. Is often the most marginalised in our society who bear the brunt. So he's sort of doubling down.
To do that again, but in a Scottish accent. We all want to hear that.
But he's sort of doubling down on this in his speech. It's sort of mixed message. On the one hand, Scotland's the best country to lead in the world. It's been a real privilege because it's such a great country. But on the other hand, it's chock full of these racists. I mean, it's like, which is it, Humza?
Yeah, Simon Evans pointed out on GB that actually the achievement of his race is not his achievement, it's the people's achievement for being so colourblind and progressive that they elected him. You know, why is that actually his achievement? There's kind of an argument there to be said. You know, he's not elected. Well, then again, he wasn't elected really by anyone, was he? So, you know, the people didn't actually elect him, so that might be the flaw in that.
Won an election.
Yeah, pretty much singularly useless. I mean, what did he actually achieve?
Well, he is the first SNP leader of Scotland not to be arrested.
Oh, good.
Because the previous two have both been arrested at various points. So there's that.
What, Sturgeon?
Sturgeon and Salmon.
Salmon was arrested, was he?
Yeah. In addition, there were more hate crime reports filed about his white speech than about anyone else. So that's sort of an achievement. What else? Hard to think of much else. I mean, interestingly, it's sort of ironic, and it shows you just what a basket case Scottish politics is. That the reason he's been defenestrated is because he told his Green Coalition partners that the target of reducing carbon emissions by 75% by 2030 was unachievable. Achieving net zero, or getting 75% of the way, 3/4 of the way to net zero within 6 years, he said it was unachievable. I mean, obviously, it's blindingly obvious to anyone that, of course, that's completely unachievable. It was a mad, unrealistic target imposed on them by the Greens. But just for saying that, probably the one sensible decision he's made in his entire short-lived Humza the Brief premiership, Briefheart. The one sensible thing he's done has been his downfall, because Scottish politics is so batshit crazy.
Yeah, that was the one thing I did say on GB. I was like, well, yeah, it's good he's gone, but the reason he's actually gone is because he's not quite as insanely far left as the Greens. And they even said here, the Scottish Greens parliamentary group had decided unanimously to support the no confidence motion. This is what started it all, albeit with a heavy heart, adding that Yusuf had chosen to capitulate to socially and economically conservative voices at the SNP. He went for being too conservative. Can you imagine that?
Too right-wing.
The guy who hates 90% of the country and who's just the most radical person imaginable was too conservative for the nutcase Greens. Scotland is an absolute basket case.
Fraser Nelson wrote a pretty good piece on the day he resigned, talking about he says that Nicola Sturgeon, because of her espousal of the nationalist cause made herself bulletproof. It didn't matter that the SNP had failed in government across almost every metric. They'd been staggeringly incompetent. But for some reason, that didn't affect her popularity, her political authority. But Humza, even though he's tried to do the same, wrap himself in the saltire, it hasn't worked. And finally, the SNP is being held accountable for its staggering incompetent record in office. And he gave a few examples. So the World Health Organization ranked Scotland top of 43 countries and regions for 15-year-old boys having used marijuana. The most recent PISA report showed a decade-long decline in Scottish school attainment, alongside one of the highest levels of state spending on education in the world. Another flagship SNP policy, this was part of the SNP Green Coalition deal, was making bus travel free for everyone under 22. And that's meant child gangs running amok on buses in Scotland, to the extent that Scottish bus drivers are actually, it's the only country in Europe in which bus drivers are asking for panic buttons, onboard policemen and de-escalation training, because it's caused kind of wreaked havoc on Scottish bus routes. There's free travel for under 22-year-olds. I mean, almost everything they do, everything they touch, turns to shit. I mean, they are just staggeringly awful, and it's an indictment of Labour's devolution policy. You know, the idea that it was going to stall nationalist movements. On the contrary, it just kind of turbocharged them, and we ended up, with these completely hopeless politicians who really weren't fit to serve in office. I mean, admittedly, our politicians aren't great, but Rishi Sunak looks like Winston Churchill next to Humza Yousaf. I mean, he's just unbelievably poor.
You're kind of saying what Simon Evans said last night. They need an Englishman up there to run things. I mean, that would be a good solution. I mean, look at what Ian Dale said as well. A dignified yet quite emotional resignation from Humza Yousaf. It's sad in many ways that his tenure has ended in this way, as I think he's a fundamentally decent person. I just said Humza's a top bloke unless you're white or a woman or you like free speech or a functioning country. Completely ratioed him into oblivion with that. I mean, what a bizarre take.
A bizarre take, and good point made by Brendan O'Neill in his sort of obituary of Humza in Spiked. He reminded me that in 2021, Humza whipped up a huge public outcry over the fact that his child hadn't been given a place by the local nursery school. And he said that it was clear that this nursery accepted kids with white Scottish-sounding names, but not kids called Yousaf. And accused essentially this nursery and the head of this nursery of being Islamophobic. I mean, talk about endangering someone's life by making a public accusation of Islamophobia in the public square. Turns out that the head of the nursery was actually of South Asian origin herself, and it was just a simple misunderstanding, which she said could have been cleared up with a simple phone call. I mean, what sort of people are so obsessed with kind of presenting themselves as victims of Islamophobia, somehow to shore up their kind of popularity and political authority, that they're willing to effectively sacrifice a perfectly innocent head teacher of a nursery? Is that the kind of decency Ian Dale's referring to?
They're doxing the nursery. We will dox the nurseries because they're white. They're not even white, Humza. Well, I thought they were, and it's too late.
She's not white, but she's racist. Wait, no.
And Islamophobic. Oh, she's Muslim. Well, I hate them. I hate children. What?
That's the kind of guy that Ian Dale thinks is fundamentally decent. I mean, I guess it's kind of customary when someone falls on their sword, particularly if they burst into tears, to kind of praise them for being, trying to think of something nice to say. I wish him and his family well, or he showed his one Scottish leader said he showed his humanity when his parents were in danger because they were in Gaza. I mean, he hasn't really shown much sympathy for Jews in Israel or after the 7th of October. But it's like maybe Ian Dale was just scraping around trying to think of something nice to say, his Humza's kind of lowest point. But really, to describe him as a decent guy, he is not a decent guy. I mean, he's got that kind of horrible kind of chippy, condescending, snide, kind of mid-wittery. I mean, he's sort of obviously kind of patronising, unpleasant, difficult man to deal with. I mean, he's not the kind of guy you'd want to have a drink with. And I mean, is it mean of me to say any of this stuff? Given that he's just suffered, a humiliating defenestration.
Ostensibly, everything you said is correct. Maybe he's just like a nice guy in private, but just buys into all the woke stuff publicly, and that makes him appear awful. I'm being incredibly generous. People less generously were suggesting Ian Dale just needs to get on with all these people because, he works so closely with them and interviews them and so on. I would never say something so cynical. I'm sure it was a genuine comment, if misguided. But the crying, we should talk about briefly, because it's a good question, isn't it? In the past, that would have been seen as weakness, as terrible in England. It's very un-British. It's just not something you'd have seen in politics in the days of yore. And Thatcher did cry once, but it was very against type. So it was actually quite a touching moment because she was so not like that. And I think it was at sort of the end of her career. I can't remember what it was, but it was at the very end in some interview, maybe after even. I can't remember.
I think it was when she was wasn't it when she was leaving Downing Street when she decided to resign?
I need to check that. But it's becoming the norm now. Theresa May, that the country I love, and then there's been all these other examples. Whereas in the past we would have immediately frowned upon it and just that'd have been it for their career, even if they weren't resigning. But now it's the opposite. It's like, it's great that he cried, and is it great? I mean, you can cry in private if your dog dies or something, but is it great to cry in public on a platform like that?
Well, whenever I've had this, I'm not a fan. And whenever I had this argument,
you've never cried though.
I never cried. But
don't know what it is.
I had a big row with my wife when Andy Murray cried after winning Wimbledon, and she thought that was completely forgivable, totally fine. It was just an authentic expression of emotion in the moment because it meant so much, and it was an incredible relief after the pressure he'd been under. But my kind of counter argument was, no, it's not that we're no longer as repressed as we were. And now that it's kind of more acceptable to show your feelings, we can let our natural feelings, which were always there, come out. We don't need to shut them down anymore, but it's completely natural, it's spontaneous. I disagree. I think that actually, once it becomes kind of customary to cry in particular situations, people just feel obliged to cry. They're kind of responding to social messages and what are kind of ingrained customs now associated with particular rituals. It's not an authentic expression of emotion. It's kind of it's emotion being induced by expectations because of how other people have behaved in similar situations. So now, if you win a sporting contest, you're expected to cry, male or female. If you resign from office now, it's become customary to cry. I don't think it's an authentic expression of emotion that they would have felt in earlier times, but kind of put the lid on. They're now just kind of they're doing it to please the crowd, basically.
This clip's going to be used against us as a show. We're just monsters. And look at these right wingers. I sort of agree to an extent. I mean, I'm going to be as generous as possible. I agree. Yeah, it's become the norm, and so in the past where you might have held it in, you won't hold it in, and you may even be more likely to let it out because of the reasons you've said. I do think there's an exception with people like Andy Murray. Singles tennis at that level is incredibly hard at any level, to be honest. You've been through all these grueling sets, you're probably injured, no one thought you could win it. A spontaneous eruption of emotion that you can't help is a bit different. I remember Norm Macdonald, when he was doing a tribute to David Letterman on the final Letterman show, suddenly was overcome with emotion. And it's not a very norm thing to do. He was just genuine, it was totally genuine. And we found out now he was, he didn't have that long to live even. So there is a genuine time for that, and I think that's okay. But yeah, like you say, when it becomes the norm, it becomes not brave or vulnerable already. It just becomes kind of, although those are questionable, whether you want leaders to be vulnerable is a question anyway, but yeah, it becomes customary, and it becomes, you just wonder if how genuine it is, or if he couldn't have held it back. His was quite a moderate cry. I think he could have held that in. It was quite a low level cry. He hadn't won any tennis, he hadn't played any long sets. I think he could have held that one in.
Yeah. For me, the issue isn't whether they're capable of suppressing the emotion when they're feeling it. It's a question of how authentic is that emotion. The natural assumption in kind of popular culture is that every expression of emotion is authentic.
Right.
There's a kind of truth to it, which there isn't when people are kind of talking or answering questions or performing. There's something non-performative about it, is the kind of assumption, whereas my claim is there's something performative about it. Maybe it's only semi-conscious, but it seems to be a product of social contagion. rather than a completely organic expression of what their authentic selves.
In singing coaching, there's such thing as the crying voice. You can deliberately add a sort of crying element to your singing voice to make it seem more emotional. So yeah, you can definitely fake it. Matt Hancock faked it, didn't he? Everyone pretty much
faked it
with
for
his
sure.
fakes.
Yeah,
because he's not. He doesn't have emotions. So he's like, oh, humans seem to have emotions. I better pretend I'm crying. It was really weird. Now I noticed he's a new advocate for euthanasia. If anyone was wondering which side of that debate you should be on, hopefully that clears it up for you. So we're not sure about the crying. And the other thing I say about the crying, finally, is that he hasn't really achieved anything. Maybe he's crying because he's lost, but like Murray winning Wimbledon, it's extraordinarily hard to do, especially with his style without a massive serve. It was pretty hard to do. It was an incredibly hard thing to do. A lot of long rallies, great achievement.
Definitely more forgivable in Murray's case.
Definitely more forgivable. Yeah. Whereas Humza has done nothing. He hasn't really done. It's not really a crying situation. Yeah. Even Theresa May, people didn't like it. Like, have you done enough to cry?
Yeah, and actually, Humza, you can understand why he doesn't feel humiliated and ashamed because he's achieved so little for the Scottish people. Because as far as he's concerned, it's the Scottish people's duty to do something for him, particularly as a kind of standard bearer of an oppressed minority. So he's his idea is that I will help you, the Scottish people, do something for people like me and the people I represent by becoming less racist, by becoming less discriminatory and prejudiced, by putting more people who look like me in high office. Yeah. And he expressed disappointment, actually, when he stood down, that Scotland hasn't done enough for him. It's still quite racist. It's still got all these problems. He did his best to help Scotland improve, to show him it could do better, but actually, at the end of the day, it rather let him down. I mean, that seemed to be kind of one of the themes of his speech. It wasn't that I haven't done enough for Scotland. It's like, Scotland, you tried, but you didn't do quite enough for me. You didn't become unracist enough.
Right, that's funny. And what did you make of that multiculturalism claim? Because to me, it was a total non sequitur. He's, as I said, he pointed out that we've got all these rubbish leaders. He didn't use that word. So therefore, multiculturalism can hardly be said to have failed or is a success. Total non sequitur, because one, multiculturalism means simply retaining your autonomous culture of origin rather than adopting your new nation's culture in sort of silos. So it's got nothing to do with anything to do with political leaders, really, especially as they've all been rubbish. If they'd been good, it would have been proof that perhaps assimilation works. And if they'd have been bad, it might have been, probably just a failure of those individual leaders. But any way I look at it, I can't get my head around why having a load of non-white leaders is a vindication of multiculturalism. At best, it's nothing to do with it. At worst, you could say it's an indictment of it, but I don't think it even is. I think it's just irrelevant, isn't it?
Is the argument that it shows how accepted ethnic minorities have become in places like Scotland over quite a short period of time.
It's integration, it's not multiculturalism.
Well, I suppose
he's using that colloquial definition that means the opposite of multiculturalism.
Well, I suppose isn't he saying that the colour blindness or the willingness of the Scottish people to tolerate, to accept, to celebrate people like me in leadership positions is evidence that multiculturalism has succeeded?
Yeah, but that to me is still assimilation or integration. I mean, I need to find this, but to me it's generally thought, as I understood it, that multiculturalism means retaining individual culture versus assimilation.
I've retained my Muslim identity.
Right.
I've held prayer meetings at Bute House.
And I still become a shit leader.
And I still managed to become an incompetent SNP leader, even though I didn't get arrested or haven't yet.
Which puts me in the top 1%. Yeah. You're right. Maybe he meant that. I mean, it was pretty tenuous. It was all nonsense. And then some people have pointed out we're getting Anas Sarwar next, who's done a speech. He was like a clone. White. He's done the identical speech. So I said on X, it's like that old phrase, out of the frying pan into this other wanker, because the guy's identical. This is not a racial statement. He's made the exact same white speech, and now he's the leader of Labour opposition, of Labour Scotland. So won't we just end up with the same thing?
Yeah, it's disappointing, and not only is he kind of sing from the same hymn sheet as Humza when it comes to critical race theory and the rest of it. But he also is in favour of passing an anti-misogyny bill. And I don't think he's going to recoil from Humza's bizarre claim that women can be guilty of misogyny as well as men. And that if a woman says something discriminatory to a biological male who imagines they're a woman, then the woman could be prosecuted for being misogynistic under this new law. I hope that he's asked about that during the next election campaign, because it seems to be put him now at odds with Keir Starmer. I don't know if you saw, but on Breakfast TV today, he said that yes, it's not wrong to say that biological women have cervixes. Huge concession, apparently.
Wow.
But it was asked about whether, change his mind. So, and then Susanna, what's her face, immediately followed up with, well, are you going to apologise to Rosie Duffield? And he kind of obfuscated about that.
Look,
but
I never apologise. What was his statement on that? That's ridiculous.
Well, she's a great contributor to the party. She's widely respected. He didn't actually say he was going to apologise.
Right.
One question I got, Nick, is why do you think it is that first Nicola Sturgeon, but actually even more so Humza Yousaf, went in for this kind of toxic cocktail combining ethno-nationalism with kind of radical progressive ideology? Why did they think that was a kind of electorally winning mixture? And what was it about, wokery-pokery that in their heads rhymed with Scottish nationalism and made them such kind of a good fit in that kind of new ideological package they've been trying unsuccessfully to sell to the Scottish people? Yeah,
it's a great question. I mean, firstly, what is Scotland's white percentage? Let me just check that.
97%.
95.4 here, but yeah, you might be right. I mean, so yes, it's obviously not a great strategy to alienate 95% of your voters by saying that they're evil. And I do think they missed that, although that's not the reason they went, the reason was party politics. I do think there's a great widespread distaste. Maybe I'm in an echo chamber, but I've noticed a widespread distaste for this flagrant anti-white hatred of Yousaf and Sarwar. Yousaf's been noticed more than Sarwar, but he's done the same thing. And I think the tables are just turned on it. Musk has taken over Twitter and said he hates this anti-white racism, which has sort of given people perhaps more freedom to talk about it. Just generally in the culture, people have become sick of it and able to talk about it. For many years, we just had to accept it, and it was just, white people are evil. Obviously, I never did because I'm not an idiot, but many people are like, yeah, we're evil and terrible, and that was the norm. But that's been shifting, and they've bargained on that being the cool de rigueur thing to say, but of course the problem about these fads is that they very quickly change, and they've said all that, and now it looks bad. It's also the gap, of course, between the ruling elite and the people. The elite have all kinds of mad ideas, one of which is an obsession with diversity, which most people in the country don't care about. They would prefer the colourblind 90s ideal, which we probably got used to in this country. And as you call it ethno-nationalism. Problem with that is it's the wrong ethnicity. I mean, you can't have ethno-nationalism when you're like a tiny percentage of the population. So even if you object to ethno-nationalism, at least get the right country. At least be like a pro-white guy in Finland. You can't do that. You've messed up your numbers.
It is a kind of... I guess maybe if
maybe Diane Abbott did the sums on that.
If you're black or brown and you're leading an ethno-nationalist movement, you have to embrace wokery-pokery to make it seem less peculiar. I guess
they go together. It's critical race theory is where it comes from.
Yeah.
They go together with wokeness because it's critical race theory. Everyone's bought in the elites. There's Robin DiAngelo garbage. White people are inherently evil. They're fragile, yet they're also this circular logic where everything white people do is somehow either oppressive or pathetic. They're always wrong.
Yeah, and I think how they've managed to kind of bolt these things together is in part by when they say white, what they really mean is the English. And just as, Scottish nats have been kind of harbouring a grievance about being oppressed by the English, by the colonialists to the south, so that kind of rhymes with a kind of wider anti-colonialist, anti-English narrative, which feeds into kind of a lot of woke grievance mongering.
That's interesting, because in this country, far right means English. People have been saying, I think Carl Benjamin said, I think that's a good point. When they say far right, they kind of mean, the English working class specifically, that we need to get rid of them. They're just normal blokes, but they're now far right. In Scotland, that's an interesting point. White means English, and in England, far right means English. So all these weird terms are just English.
But it's almost as though Humza was trying to reinvent the SNP as the victim party. Just as the people of Scotland have been victims of English colonialism, so black and brown people have been victims of English colonialism too. We have a common cause. Let's rally behind the victimhood banner.
Right. But then he was always going to alienate the 95% of white Scottish people who may well hate England, frequently do, but they don't hate being white.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe they weren't going for 95%. They were just trying to get enough votes to kind of get over the line and form a government, which they managed to. The SNP didn't manage to do in the last regional Scottish election, so had to enter into a coalition with the Greens. But maybe that's kind of at the heart of it. It's a kind of cold-blooded political calculation. How are we going to form a government? Well, we're going to have to embrace some of this woke shit, because in that way we'll get the Greens to come on board and we can forge this Butte House agreement. And maybe actually that coalition was always a bit more fragile than it seemed, and Humza maybe seemingly kind of
but were they a part on the woke stuff? They were part of the green stuff. They were kind of
maybe
of one mind of the woke
stuff. I mean, it feels almost like
I don't think they were thinking pragmatically about it. I think they're ideologues. They're ideologues. I mean, that's another argument, is that they're just ideologues and they're not thinking practically about the election. Because if they were, they wouldn't follow any of this woke bollocks.
I mean, maybe it's partly. I mean, I guess you see. I mean, I'm always slightly mystified by the embrace of radical progressive ideology by traditional working class political movements, whether they be political parties like the Labour Party, the Democrats, or trade unions. It is slightly odd that they've kind of grafted this kind of mind virus cultivated in laboratories at Ivy League universities by gender studies and queerness and whiteness professors, that they've kind of embraced that so wholeheartedly. Maybe it's because of the bankruptcy of traditional kind of socialist ideology. They know that they've kind of run out of road there. The public doesn't have much tolerance for wanting to nationalise industries, wanting to redistribute wealth. They've seen that it doesn't really work. They don't want to see growth stalled and so on and so forth. So they've embraced this alternative ideology as a kind of as a way of kind of trying to stay in power and kind of give themselves a new lease of life.
That's the whole that's the whole Blairite project, isn't it? As people like Hitchens have pointed out, that's the whole project. You move on from the mechanical and old-fashioned leftist socialist garbage, and you move on to this much smoother Gramscian, subtle undermining of institutions. That's the whole project. But when you talk about the why have they done it and it's not smart, he's not. I don't think he was thinking in terms of smart, savvy politics, because he wouldn't have alienated the Greens if he was. And he was obsessed with SNP being a minority again. Seems like he just didn't care. He's into minorities of all kinds. He doesn't really care about what wins.
Well, I think he clearly, the reason he ended the coalition agreement is because he anticipated that the Greens were going to do that, and he wanted to preempt them, so it didn't look like he was being bullied by them. He wanted to make it look like his decision. But I think he calculated when he did that that in the event of a no confidence motion being called, the Greens wouldn't vote with the Tories, that they'd abstain, and he could remain in power as the leader of a minority government.
Right.
But then he discovered that the Greens actually were intending to vote with the Tories when they did table a motion of no confidence in his government, and that's why he's resigned.
I see.
That was his miscalculation. He didn't realise they'd be so annoyed when he preemptively did the preemptive breakup that they'd actually act in the way they have, and like a kind of woman scorned.
Woman scorned. And he also had the woman scorned problem with Ash Regan, who was going to have a deciding vote on him, even though he'd said that she was no great loss. So he alienated a lot of people, seemingly, certainly a few people. One thing that bothers me is that they're all so young. Humza Yousaf and Anna Sawa are younger than me, so it makes me go, of course they know nothing. Because when I grew up, I used to think at least there's sort of some sort of adults in charge. When I realised they're younger than me, I may have suspected they knew nothing, but now I know they don't know anything. Because they're probably younger than me and thicker than me. Who are these people? Why I could be running it better than them? And probably literally true.
If you're wondering why someone sort of seemingly with so few political skills went into politics, has kind of humiliated himself on the public stage, and is now slinking off with his tail between his legs. What was in it for him? Why did he choose this career? Well, it turns out that if you've been First Minister, you're entitled to receive 50% of your First Minister's salary as a pension, payable every year for the rest of your life. So he's going to be paid $52,000 a year by the taxpayers for the rest of his life now.
That's just disgusting.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Just for being awful and hating white people. That is disgusting. The big question becomes who will replace him. I say big question, it's not that big, it's only Scotland, let's calm down, but it's big-ish. So who's going to replace him? Because I'm sorry, I was looking at Monty wondering if my head's cut off, but that's the least of my worries. John Sweeney, is the favourite at the moment. He's a guy he's a real lifer. He joined the SNP at 15. So imagine what ridiculous views he's had to accede to.
Apparently he started out reasonably sensible, but has totally embraced wokedom in the past decade
Back
or so.
Transgender self-ID at 16. Supports net zero. Wants Scotland to be independent, but in the EU, which is one of the most dumb non sequitur oxymorons ever.
Understood that.
We want to be independent in the EU.
We want to be free of the yoke of colonial oppression in the UK, so we can be oppressed by bureaucrats in the EU. That's much better.
They may take our lives, but they will never take our freedom unless they're in Brussels. Then they can have it. Yeah.
They can have it for nothing.
So that's
they won't want them.
Well, that's another issue.
Economy is a complete basket case.
Yeah, we just want no more woke politicians. He voted for the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, which is what I alluded to before, which is gender self-ID at 16. We just want to get rid of these people now. We've got to get rid of woke politicians. Gender madness is ending. We want to get rid of these people and not give them a chance. But he is the leader. I don't know if that means he'll stay leader. Kate Forbes has gone behind where she used to be. The outside favourite is Jenny Gilruth. She was fourth last time I looked at a poll that had Swinny top, then Kate Forbes, then Neil Gray, who no one knows anything about. He's just the grey man of Scottish politics. I don't know anything about him anyway. Jenny Gilruth, I've heard, is an outside bet. What do you think to her? Any ideas?
Weirdly, she's married to Kezia Dugdale, the former Labour leader.
Right.
And not that should disqualify her, but I think she's even younger than Humza. And I don't think she has much political experience. I'm not sure, but I don't think has she served?
At least she's actually out as a lesbian, which is different from some Scottish leaders. Is that allowed to be in? Well, let's timestamp that in case we need to. Andrew, let's timestamp that in case that needs to be deleted for legal reasons. Maybe I should rephrase it. At least she's. No, there's no way to rephrase that. It's just always bad. Yeah, they're all young. She's young. Who did you say she was younger than?
I think she's even younger than Humza, isn't she?
No, she's a bit older than Humza, but she's still younger than me. It's embarrassing. Yes, they're all. Why can't they get a proper leader? I like Kate Forbes. Do you know who else likes Kate Forbes? Muslims. No one saw that coming, but because she's open about her faith, and she's even younger, but because she's open about her faith and is quite socially conservative, they actually respect her more.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you wouldn't have thought that gender woo-woo, which has been so instrumental to kind of Humza's term in office, would appeal to his Muslim supporters, would you?
No, they didn't like it. They famously didn't like it. They didn't like him. They like Kate Forbes. Yeah, but no, give us the one who's saying stuff like we.
It's because she's as you say, it's because she's openly religious and uninhibited about it and socially conservative.
Yeah, and they recognise Jesus as a prophet, not the Son of God, but far more crossover with a Kate Forbes and a practicing Muslim than there is a woke Humza Yusuf, apart from him actually literally being a Muslim. Don't you think?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, she has in some ways the same kind of decision to make as Penny Mordaunt and Kemi Badenoch, which is, do you want to take on the leadership of a party which looks almost certain to be wiped out during the general election? She might think it might be better to let John Swinney be the caretaker until after the general election, and then at the next leadership contest, go for it.
Yeah, maybe. That's interesting. I'm not sure what the last I heard anyway. Jenny Gilruth is an outside bet, but who knows? They don't exactly. I like Kate Forbes. They don't exactly actually have a wealth of talent, do they? Exactly. Who's that? Is that Humza now?
No, yes.
Is that probably the thing? Nicholas Sturgeon?
I heard what you said, you white bastard.
It's Nicholas Sturgeon after our libel there. And if we've taken that out, then you'll never hear that.
It and run. Yeah. Who are you referring to?
Although she's probably got enough legal issues at the moment. All right. So do you have any particular favourites? Well, one you think will win it?
Well, I like Kate Forbes too, but I would have thought if she's sensible, she won't want it this time. She'll want it next time.
My big problem with all of these people is that they're white, so therefore I despise them all. That's just me.
At least they're women.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I hate white men the most. All right, I think we pretty much covered that. I was 30 minutes on Scotland. That's a good value for you. Now let's move on and do good old Dr. Dan Pulser. You may have seen this story. He's defected to the Labour. I hope that, did I say that correctly in my introduction? I'm now panicking that I got it the wrong way around. I think I got it the right way around. He went from Labour to Tory. It's so hard to know because they're the same party.
He went from. What did he?
He went from Tory to Labour.
Tory to Labour.
Did I say that in the intro though? I'm now paranoid. We better check that. But anyway, the point is, I'm so confused, guys, because they're the same party, and I keep forgetting which is which. Which is the blue one? Which is the red one? So he went from Tory to Labour because, get this, the Tories have become a nationalist party of the right. What an I mean, everything about that sentence is wrong. I admit is of might be correct and but nationalist, no, they're not nationalist in any way. They're globalist. Okay, Rishi wanted Brexit. A few of them wanted Brexit, but basically they're a globalist party. They're not of the right in any way. They're the most far left government, arguably, of all time in this country. I mean, Cameron's A-list, obsession with diversity, net zero stuff. Which has been a bit more moderate on that. Ridiculous immigration numbers even Blair wouldn't have done. Highest taxes since the 40s by some metrics. I mean, by what metric? The diversity built Britain coin. In what way are we calling the Tories a nationalist party of the far? Did he say far right or just the right? I think he said the right.
But get used to it, because this is going to be an argument made by many left-wing Tory MPs, those that remain after the election. That's going to be the big debate in the Conservative Parliamentary Party during the post-mortem of what went wrong. There'll definitely be a noisy faction saying we were too right-wing, we were too nationalist.
Yes.
The Rwanda policy is what did for us.
Yeah, you're right, because there's now these rebels on the warpath after MP defects to Labour. This was in the Sunday Telegraph. And a group of Conservative MPs has crafted a 100 days to save Britain plan. Couldn't do it in 14 years. We'll do it in 100 days, lads. We'll cram last minute, like when you're a student going, oh, I've got to write an essay on the morning. So they want to somehow save Britain in 100 days. And their answer is Penny Mordaunt. You've got this one nation law. I mean, they might be right. Tragically, they might be right and I might be wrong in terms of sheer numbers. But they think Penny Mordaunt with a big sword is the answer. 100 days.
Yeah, and this is obviously also not just triggered by Dan Poulton's defection. Dr. Dan Poulton's defection. It's also
Poulter.
It's also in anticipation of the local election results, which everyone's expecting to be bad. I think even Richard Holden, the chairman of the party, I can't find the quote. He said the election results this Thursday are going to be tough for us. So clearly this kind of 100 days scheme is designed to get more MPs to put in letters of no confidence to the 22 in the hope that it'll trigger a confidence vote in Rishi Sunak, and even if he wins, he'll then fall on his sword. And the successor they're touting is Penny Mordaunt, who they think is the only MP who could possibly turn things around, or at least limit the damage in the run-up to the election.
And just more on Poulter, by the way, in The Guardian, he described Liz Truss's premiership as a shattering moment for moderates in the party. Shattering. And his other big thing was the NHS. He said, I could not go on as part of that. I have not been able to look my NHS colleagues in the eye, my patients in the eye, and my constituents in the eye. I know that the Conservative government has been failing on the thing I care about most, which is the NHS and its patients. So he's saying that they've not funded the NHS properly. And I always counter by saying the NHS is a flawed idea at root, brought in by Labour.
The counter is that real spending on the NHS has
gone up
significantly,
and
increased
it's a black hole.
over the last 14 years.
Yeah.
Throwing money at the problem, weirdly, doesn't seem
work
to solve it.
Yeah.
His two kind of big points were Tories, too right-wing, too nationalistic, hate the Rwanda policy, and they're not doing enough to save the NHS. And clearly that's been scripted for him by Keir Starmer's office, who've kind of rehearsed this in order to cause maximum damage on the eve of the local elections.
Yeah, who's behind it?
He's been promised a peerage, though that's been denied.
Who's behind it is who's behind Starmer, which is of course the Dark Lord Tony Blair, as my friend Nima calls him. Someone sent me a thing today. The Blair in there was a BBC documentary on Machiavelli, and they said and it's an old thing dug up. Alan Yentov was visiting where and it was where he was from or something, and he goes, I guess he was here last week. Tony Blair, he went to visit the home of Machiavelli, and they gave him a copy of The Prince, but he probably had already read it like hundreds of times. I imagine he's there on holiday with Cherie Blair. It's like, oh, we've got to go and pay tribute to the master. And she's like, but Tony, you said you're on holiday. Can you not relax this time? You said you like Silence Woman. He's just obsessed with Machiavelli. Doesn't that seem very suspicious to you that Tony Blair just loves Machiavelli? Is it surprising to you, though?
It is not surprising.
Blair's behind it all. He's behind this defection. I mean, I've got no proof of this, but while I'm making libelous claims, he is he's behind Starmer, who's behind, like you say, scripting the move for Poulter for maximum damage. Yeah. What a traitor, though, Poulter, to go along with it.
Yeah, I mean,
what a turncoat.
He was.
What a bounder.
Wasn't he another one of Cameron's A-listers?
Probably.
Hand-picked because he was the face of the new modern Conservative Party. It's like there should be some kind of ideological purity test before they get to stand.
It came in 2010. So that's the suspect, isn't it? That's immediately Cameron. They're all Cameron. I mean, Truss, it was Cameron. Even though I like Liz, they're all Cameron. Yeah, I don't trust it all. But imagine you're still not lefty enough for the modern Tories. You have to go into Labour. I mean, it's going to be very dark.
Yeah. I mean, you think people on the right are marginalised now.
Oh, yeah.
When we have a Conservative government with a huge majority. I mean, just think how marginalised we're going to be when Starmer wins a supermajority.
This is what I ask everyone. I asked Carl Benjamin on my podcast, 27,000 likes as we record, views, current thing with Carl Benjamin. And that is, I was saying, is it going to be illegal to be Conservative? And I ask everyone because NatCon suggested to me we're headed that way. And, if you say certain things online, or if you are actually a bit more far right and you post and you encourage the posting of stickers, you'll go to jail for 2 years. So, and we've seen the attacks on GB News, even though it's not really right wing, but it's more and more illegal to be right wing. And under Labour, I mean, will this podcast be allowed? You've got to wonder. We'll have to have a sort of someone sitting in on it, moderating it, probably sent by Starmer.
Yeah,
Starmer himself will come down, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that in some ways, Humza Yousaf's period in office is a kind of foretaste of what things will be like under Keir Starmer. The emphasis will be on tackling racism and racial inequality and misogyny and transphobia and homophobia and doing something more for the LGBTQ plus community.
Do you know what?
That'll be kind of, because everything else costs money.
Or will it be a more Blairite? He's got the Blair leadership manual. He's got Blair behind the scenes. More ruthlessly pragmatic Blairite program where you undermine things at the roots. You continue to undermine the family and society, but you don't do it so overtly. You put away wokeness on a superficial level, and they do it more. For example, Starmer's obsessed with assisted dying, and that feels to me like quite a Blairite thing, although he is Catholic allegedly. But I could see euthanasia becoming massive. Really big, nasty changes rather than the superficial nonsense of wokeness. Will he be smart enough to put through actual massive changes to our society like euthanasia?
I think that even today he's pivoted on this question of can women have cervixes.
That's what I mean. Superficially,
I think he's trying to neutralise that particular issue in the run-up to the general election campaign, because he doesn't want to be constantly asked what a woman is, every time he's interviewed in every leadership debate. So he's trying to U-turn on that issue without being too conspicuous about it and failing. And he is still going to be asked, but I think it'll be... But I think that'll be, for the duration of the general election campaign, they will try and put woke away. They realise that those issues aren't election winners, particularly the trans issue. But in office, I mean, the main change that we're going to see under Labour, I think, is going to be the resumption of the Blairite constitutional project, which involves basically transferring power away from our elected representatives in Parliament towards unelected officials, whether judges, civil servants, quangocrats, diversitycrats. And we know that the deep state has effectively embraced radical progressive ideology. And so as the deep state becomes more powerful and our elected representatives less powerful in the next 10 years, so I think we're going to see the triumph of this ideology. I think it's naive to think that Labour will kind of put it away.
That's interesting, because it's not as if Blair can control absolutely everything because those people are ideologically woke, because that's just what they're like. wokeness will pervade because the quangos and the blob will pervade and the blob is woke. Whereas Blair up on high and Starmer probably don't care either way about woke, but they'll be like, well, let's get in euthanasia, let's get in the transfer of powers, let's get in digital authoritarianism to a new level, which Blair's obsessed with the ID cards, a European ID card or a global ID card run by Tony Blair. That's what he wants. So currency as well, maybe digital currency, things like this.
Yeah.
Probably with a woke flavor, but you're right. But with these fundamental, that's what I see: digital ID, digital currency. I'm just thinking of it now out loud, but I think I'm right. Euthanasia, abortion, everyone being. There'll probably be a cap on how old you're allowed to be on the Labour. Probably be about 70.
Be like Logan's Run.
Yeah, because they're not going to do anything about the birth rate problem. So immigration will increase, but they'll cap the age you can be. They'll keep aborting massive numbers of babies. It'll be just a death cult.
That'll be the way to solve the difficulty about not being able to break the triple pension lock. We'll just kill people before they get old enough to claim their pensions.
Yeah, boom. Stop the Tories. Because Tories, we're going to do the triple pension. Well, so are we. Well, get this. We don't have that problem anymore. Blair's solved that for you. Tony has solved that. It's all going to go away. Don't worry, Keir. It's going away. Then how am I going to explain to the nation, Tony, that you want to cap the age of people at 70? They'll understand.
I mean, another reason.
Tony's saying.
Another reason for thinking that wokeness isn't going to go away under Labour is that they'll want to make reducing inequality, fighting inequality, their big kind of rallying cry, and they're not going to do much to tackle socioeconomic inequality. By the sounds of it, I mean, they can't do much without damaging the economy. So what kind of inequality are they going to tackle? Racial inequality, inequality between gay people and straight people, cis people and het people, etc. Those will be the forms of inequality they'll be focusing on and claiming to be making progress on. I mean, they've already said they're going to pass a Racial Equality Act. They're probably going to amend the Equality Act itself to bring in other protected characteristics such as transgender identity in general.
Endless HR legal bollocks.
I don't see it going away, but
Starmer's a lawyer. It'll just be endless legalistic bollocks, won't it?
There'll be a lot of that. Yeah. Well, there'll be this huge transfer of power to lawyers.
Yeah, that's what I always say. Lawyers don't have enough power in our society. Oh, we've gone back to the other Weekly Sceptic. We had the purple one last week. Now we're back the burgundy. Now we're back to the. I'm just saying it now before everyone says it. I like the podcast, but a couple of complaints. You know what I mean? You always get, well, why does the background keep changing? It's a good question, actually. We will fire some people for that. All right, so we've done SMP, we've done old Poulter, and so now I say let's go on and do Rwanda/Ireland, I'm calling this, because there's sort of several stories swirling around this, mainly that, Rishi said already that the migrants fleeing to Ireland proves that our deterrent is working, which was quite based, actually. But now Ireland's trying to send them back, and you, I'm sure, will correct me on the details, but they're trying to send them back by saying Britain's UK is a safe country. And I tried to make a joke about this and was pedantically picked up on by GB News, but I was saying we can easily prove UK is not a safe country. Just go on Twitter or just any number of things. We can easily show it's not a safe country. But if Ireland can show that UK is a safe country, they can send them back. There's this High Court ruling they've come up with so they can send the migrants back, and we're obviously going to try and not let them get away with that. Am I basically right? Satire aside, Toby, am I roughly right?
Well, this story has so many levels of irony. It's slightly mind-boggling.
Okay.
But in March, the Irish was it the Irish High Court?
Yeah. Ruled last month that the Irish government's declaration of the UK as a safe third country to which it could return asylum seekers was unlawful owing to the Rwanda bill. Yeah.
And so now what the Irish government, so now that means that Ireland cannot send asylum seekers back across the border into the UK because their courts wouldn't allow them to do that. That could be challenged in the Irish court, and the Irish court would uphold the challenge. So they're doing exactly what Rishi Sunak is doing in response to exactly the same problem when it comes to sending illegal migrants to Rwanda. They're passing a law to override their own courts, even though Ireland for quite some time now has been presenting itself as a kind of bastion of kind of woke liberalism. Unlike the xenophobic Little Englanders, over there in the UK, we embrace diversity. We embrace asylum seekers. Come to us. And now, all of a sudden, they're saying
now they actually have some.
But
they already had loads.
Again, another irony is
these are new ones.
They're taking a leaf directly out of Rishi Sunak's book. So Rishi Sunak doesn't want to deal with the vast numbers of legal migrants, which make up the vast majority of migrants entering our country each year. He doesn't want to do anything about that for various reasons. So he's focusing on illegal migrants, stopping the small boats to try and create the impression he's doing something about it, to allay people's anxiety about the huge levels of inward migration. Ditto in Ireland. Ireland had something like 140,000 migrants enter Ireland last year, 13,000 of whom were asylum seekers. So it's less than 10%. But if you can focus on getting rid of these asylum seekers, kicking them back to the UK, it'll look like, the Irish government's doing something about it.
Yeah.
Exactly the same strategy that Rishi's using with the Rwanda policy.
That's funny, yeah. Immigration to Ireland rose by 32% in the year ending last April, with asylum seekers accounting for more than 13,000 of over 140,000 arrivals. As you say, Irish ministers suggest that 80% of the asylum seekers are crossing the border from the UK and have cited the deterrence of Rwanda as a factor. It's working. But they need their own Rwanda, don't they, to just send them somewhere else. They need to pick another country and send them off to Congo. Do you see that guy get confused between Congo and Rwanda on Question Time?
Yes.
So they can send them to Congo.
Yeah, Congo. I don't think Congo is a safe country.
How dare you?
But it's actually a huge boon for Rishi Sunak. I mean, it's enabled him to pick a fight. It was enabled him first of all to say, look, the Rwanda policy is working. Because supposedly the reason all these illegal migrants are flooding across the border is because they don't want to be sent back to Rwanda.
Yeah.
Incidentally, it's ironic, isn't it, that Ireland and the EU kicked up a massive fuss about the possibility of a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. They said that will endanger the Good Friday Agreement, etc., and we bent over backwards to accommodate their objections about that, and for that reason a different kind of customs regime now applies to Northern Ireland that does to the rest of the UK. Now all of a sudden the Irish are saying, oh no, we want a hard border. We don't want these asylum seekers flooding across the border. We want a hard border with Northern. Does that mean we can actually finally do Brexit properly then?
Interesting, yeah.
But the other thing it enables Rishi to say, it enables him to pick a fight with the EU. He's saying, like, why should the EU be able to send back these illegals who've crossed the border into an EU country when we can't send illegals who've crossed the border from an EU country into the UK back to the EU? If we can't send asylum seekers back to France when they try and come here in small boats, why should we allow the EU to send illegal border crossers back to the UK?
Absolutely. It's the bully boys in Brussels. You can say that.
It might even help ameliorate some of I think probably come a little late for the locals, but it definitely, if he picks a massive fight with Brussels over this issue, it would actually help him enormously, I think.
It's the one thing he's got tough on. He wants to see this Rwanda thing through, and he's staked his whole reputation on it weirdly, because it's not going to win in the election, but I'd like to see it seen through at least.
There was a piece in the Times I read, and the Times, as you know, is pretty woke these days. Yeah. And they'd sent a journalist to some of the migrant camps in Calais and Dunkirk, and they were interviewing some of the migrants, and the migrants were talking about how much suffering they'd endured and the terrible risks they'd had to take, and friends who died, and it was all kind of terribly pro-migrant, kind of heartstring pulling stuff. And one of the reasons you were expected to you were being asked to sympathise them by the journalist was that some of them were now worried that if they actually made it to the UK, having kind of risked everything and paid vast sums of money to people traffickers to get as far as Calais or Dunkirk, they might be sent to Rwanda. So now they were having second thoughts about making the journey. It's like that was supposed to be, somehow make us even more sympathetic.
Yeah, that's the point of the policy.
That's the whole fucking point.
That's funny. But yeah, they keep dissing Rwanda. I hear it's nice. But Toby, all this is dependent, speaking of the Times, on whether we can find these buggers. I mean, the Times... I suddenly went Churchill on it. The Times is saying Home Office lost contact with thousands set for Rwanda flights. So they can't find half of them. So there's these people, there's the Home Office insisted that the remaining... So there's 5,700 migrants have been identified for removal, but only 2,145 of them continue to report to the Home Office and can be located for detention. So the remaining 3,557 have not necessarily absconded, but are not subject to reporting restrictions, which means they cannot be located. The problem is, Toby, we're deporting the ones that are too dumb to hide, and we're keeping the cunning ones that manage to hide and avoid this.
Well, that's probably quite good, isn't it?
Yes, we've got, in a way, unless they're criminal,
No,
they're smarter, but are they kind of criminal-minded?
Maybe they've kind of disappeared into
We could say we're
criminal
losing the
networks.
honest ones in a way. We're sending them
Maybe,
back
yeah.
because they're saying, "Hey, yeah, I should be sent back." And so that's my problem with it. But yeah, I mean, you've got to actually find these people. So that would be an embarrassment if they can't.
I think that was another Times story. The Times very critical of this Rwanda policy, but the whole point of the policy is to deter people from crossing the channel. It's not really about kind of repatriating or sending the people that are already here to Rwanda. And of course, we'll have to do that. But the reason it'll reduce illegal migration is it'll stop people coming here.
But also, in terms of criticisms, Macron, of course, said it was cynical. He said it was a politics of cynicism and a betrayal of European values, as if we care about what he's saying about it. But he mouthed off about the Rwanda thing. Shut up, Macron. But then also,
Germany is now also saying it's having opened its doors to migrants under Merkel,
from Syria,
now proving to be hugely politically unpopular, very destabilizing, and they want to start sending their illegal migrants to Rwanda. So funny that Macron.
We're pioneers again.
What about Germany, Macron?
Yeah. We're always pioneers. We always get blamed. We always do the hard thing. We're pioneers. We stand up. We won the war. All comes back to that. But we're pioneers with Brexit. We were the first to do that. Other people will follow. But hey, one more story on this. PM warned diverting judges to Rwanda appeals will drive backlog and soar asylum hotel bills. This was the Telegraph. And the idea is he wants to divert these first-tier tribunal judges, and there's already a massive backlog. So people like Lord Blunkett has popped up, saying that they'll just... He's saying the flights will take off, but in doing so, they'll demonstrate just how inept and inadequate the program is, and it will contrast the potential few hundred a year with the tens of thousands who've been ruled to be inadmissible and are stuck in the UK without being processed and without hope of going anywhere. So he's saying, well, it'll be a double whammy because we're paying large sums to Rwanda for a handful of asylum seekers and vast sums here at home to accommodate those whose claims are not being processed. So they're saying that diverting, because this is Rishi's flagship policy, he's going to do everything he can, divert all these judges. They're needed for the existing asylum backlog.
Yeah, but it's like that if you don't send some asylum seekers to Rwanda, then the backlog is never going to decrease because we're going to have a constant flow of illegal migrants across the channel. So, it seems like a pretty short-term objection to me. Okay,
and I'll just say lastly on this, actually, that there was this piece in the Mail, Sacre Blown, which is kind of a rubbish pun, but it was French police used knives to sink asylum seekers' boat in Dunkirk before an army of migrants then go on to overpower tear gas cops and ride on another dinghy to the UK. So this is like migrant on migrant violence. The French police have been stepping in, trying to pop their boats basically, because it's all done on dinghies. Remember, guys, we're being conquered by dinghies. But then migrants will pile on to it. There was an incident where the migrants piled onto a rival group of migrants, started knocking them off the boat. People died, people were trampled, people drowned. So there's this migrant on migrant violence now, which means this is people are going to eventually change their mind on this. I mean, the police, they're saying here in France that something needs to change and change quickly, and the police believe they can do this. And they're saying that police don't want to get involved in violence with the migrants, but they must realise this has to change. That's an Interior Ministry source in France. I just wonder if the tone's going to change on this. Ben Habib was grilled by Julia Hartley-Brewer, I know she's your mate, but she was very much like, this is appalling what Ben's saying. And he was sort of taking that sort of hard line. He's saying we're meant to be a force at the border. It's called border force. It's not our responsibility what happens to these people. Is it going to get finally the language more tough and the reality more tough on how you deal with migrants? If only partly because they're hurting other migrants. But what do you think, Toby?
It's certainly becoming less taboo to take a hard line about illegal immigration than it was even 5 years ago. I mean, during the EU referendum, Vote Leave didn't want to be associated too closely with Nigel Farage because they thought his attitude towards migrants was toxic and would alienate kind of moderate centre voters, and they wouldn't win the Brexit referendum. And maybe at the time that was the right political calculation, but you can imagine that calculation being made, but less likely to be made now. It seems like there's been a change in public attitudes towards migration, and there's this kind of inhibition about criticising the government for letting too many migrants into our country, particularly as it's all increased since Brexit. That inhibition seems to be certainly declining.
Yeah, because the situation's become.
But you can
appalling.
imagine if the Rwanda policy works and the migrant camps in Calais and elsewhere on the French coast, if they become entrenched, completely entrenched with the same people but getting more crowded, you can imagine the French actually finally doing something about it. If they're no longer a way station because the migrants are no longer crossing the channel because they don't want to risk being deported to Rwanda, the French, I imagine, will really move in and start dismantling those camps.
Let's hope so. All right, those are our main stories this week. Toby, I believe you have a quick advert.
Yes. So this is a message from Thor Holt. Believe it or not, you can improve your situation remarkably with one choice. Although my client Robert sold his company for $1 billion, money was never his guiding force. His guiding value was steady focus on this one choice. Robert had humble working class origins, but as he grew from engineer to manager to CEO and eventually secured his successful exit, he chose to focus on one thing that most avoid due to their fears or discomfort. What was it Robert prioritized? Communication. Specifically, Robert invested in guidance for public speaking, storytelling, and presenting throughout his career. Why choose to repeatedly put himself through this process? Because, Robert told me, communication confidence and capability, and enjoying it, is a number one priority for winning. From initial promotions to his MBO finance deal, to competitive pitch wins with his new venture, and then the market differentiation story which led to his eventual acquisition. Now semi-retired, Robert still refers clients to me at all stages of their careers, because he knows they'll enjoy growth in confidence and results with me. To choose your communications focus and enjoy it, like Robert did, go to growthpresenter.com. That's growthpresenter, all one word, .com for your free confidence call.
All right, thanks to Thor. And now it's everyone's favourite section, Peak Woke. So, Toby, do you want to start this week? I feel you've got quite a few Peak Wokes ready.
I've got quite a few, yeah. It's been a bit of a bonanza for woke gobbledygook this week. An employment tribunal, always reliable for coming up with peak woke content. The employment tribunal has ruled that saying back in your day to an older colleague is discriminatory. It's ageist. Next time I say something about the past, or don't say to me back in your day, Grandad, because then I can sue you in the employment tribunal.
And you would as well. You'd use the entire apparatus of the Free Speech Union to shut me down.
No, you'd have to call on their help to defend your free speech.
And would you defend?
Yeah. I think I'd have to recuse myself from the decision.
You?
I think I'd have to.
You'd sue me, and then I'd just bring the Free Speech Union on you.
Yeah,
that would be great.
Yeah.
I want to see that battle. So I might start calling you old just for that. And on a similar, by the way, we've covered on Free Speech Nation, and it's just completely absurd, isn't it? It's just the HR culture, the stuff we talked about, the sort of atomized liberal culture. Basically, I end up saying this would never happen back in my day. That's the point. It is annoying, isn't it? I mean, when people are rude because you're old, it's even happened to me from Zoomers, but I don't think it's a legal issue. And that reminds me of one of my Pete Wokes, which is calling women pretty at work is sex discrimination rules judge, an employment tribunal judge. Lo and behold, this woman was called pretty. The boss likes pretty women, so go to this meeting. And this was terrible. She was humiliated and undermined, to which I replied, welcome to the workplace. That's what it's mainly about, in my experience, is being humiliated and undermined. But, men would love this, of course. I know it's not the same. I know we're different. Imagine someone say, you go to the meeting, they like handsome men, would pay for that kind of service. That's amazing. But different for women. She wasn't thrilled with this. But it turned out they were just kind of friends. And he didn't speak to all women like this. It actually said he did not speak, consult with, or treat any other female employee like he spoke and treated me. Well, that proves it's not sexist then. It's your unique relationship, because they had a kind of boundary crossing relationship anyway. And then So the judge dismissed all the other claims, but said the pretty woman remark was upheld because it should have been obvious to this guy Crouch that the comment would be unwelcome. But is that a legal issue, an unwelcome comment at work? If it is, I've got a lot of lawsuits to file.
Yeah, I mean, and of course the reason it was unwelcome, presumably, is because he doesn't look like Brad Pitt. And had he looked like Brad Pitt, it would have been extremely welcome.
Good point.
I made that point once on Any Questions, and then this kind of this like virtually every woman in the audience queued up afterwards to tell me off.
I can't imagine Toby that happening or that
None
ever.
of them told me I was good looking.
Do you know what? That's so right though, because if people say to you, "Oh, you," not that I have a habit of going around. I don't even ask anyone out anymore. I've gone full monk mode. But if I did, people might be like, let's not use me. Let's use you. No, let's take someone else.
Ageism.
Let's say ageism. Let's say an old bloke who said back in my day was coming on to like a young woman. That's creepy and disgusting. Unless you're Leonardo DiCaprio, and then it's just completely normal because he's Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Yeah. It's all about status and all about looks. That's what I think you're right. It's an uncomfortable topic, but it's unwanted advances that are gross.
Yeah.
But wanted ones are just fine.
Yeah, and I think now
maybe that's consent though. Maybe that's normal.
And I think I think unattractive men are supposed to know that they're obviously not going to be attractive to members of the opposite sex, and therefore any advances, any praise, any compliments are going to be unwelcome. And obviously different set of rules if you're a bit of an Adonis.
Do you think? Yeah, I think the judge would have said if it was Leonardo DiCaprio, she should have known. She would have known the comment would be welcome. Like, he would know the comment would be welcome. He'd get in trouble for not doing
anything like me. The judge said, then of course the comments would have been welcome, or at least back in my day they were.
Yeah. Leonardo DiCaprio not calling you pretty would be a lawsuit because he should know that the comments will be welcome.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know.
When I worked at Vanity Fair, I remember.
You remember creating Tony Blair's career?
we went over that last week in the premium section. So if you want to find out how I created Tony, I think you're going to have to become a paid subscriber of this podcast. Only £5 a month, folks. But when I was at Vanity Fair, I remember praising a female co-worker for looking great because she'd lost weight, and I said, "God, you're looking fantastic. Have you lost weight?" And she sort of she didn't look as though it was particularly unwelcome. I was better looking then, but I was told afterwards by my mentor in the office, my rabbi, that was a completely inappropriate thing to say, because it suggested that she used to be fat.
That's it. It's always a minefield, the lost weight one. Have you lost weight?
I know.
Because they were then fat. Yeah. It's always a minefield. But people can do it with men. People do it to me all the time when I've lost weight. You can do it to men again. You can do it to men, can't you? Because we'll just be like, yeah, brilliant. I have lost a bit. Even if I've lost a bit, then put it on, they'll say it. But you can't say it. Just don't say it back. Just say, you look... No, you can't even say you look great. Not according to this. Just say nothing. Just nod. When dealing with women in the workplace, best to just nod silently and walk on. Don't even nod, actually. That could be misinterpreted. Just move past them quickly.
And if you think it's kind of bad, at GB News, hemmed in by the Equality Act. At Vanity Fair, I remember being told told a story about how in Vogue, which was where I was on the 13th floor, Anna Wintour had been walking down the corridor in her kind of Manolo Blahniks, and one of her heels had broken, and she'd come tumbling down to the ground, and was sprawled on the floor.
Wow.
And this intern, who was the daughter of another Vogue employee, remembered her mother's words, which is never speak to Anna Wintour unless spoken to. So instead of saying, "Are you okay?" Can I get anyone to help? Or can I get you a glass of water? Or helping her up, God forbid. She kind of tiptoed gingerly over the prostrate figure of Anna Wintour, and then kind of got to the end of the corridor and then ran to her mother's office, and her mother said, "Yes, darling, you did exactly the right thing."
It's just like the movie Devil Wears Prada.
They didn't tell half the story. Another thing was that if you were waiting for the lift, like,
you weren't allowed in at the same time as her. That's in the film.
At the same time as that's in How to Lose Friends and Alienate People.
Really?
It may be in Devil Wears Prada.
But it is in the very start sequence. Yeah. One of the models gets in at the same time. She goes, "Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Sorry," and gets out again.
Yeah.
What's her name in the film? Sorry. I can't remember what her name is.
Meryl Streep character.
Yeah, but she says sorry, her name, and then walks away. So that was real as well. Was it? Did you ever get in the lift with her?
I did once get in the lift with her, and I was then chastised for it. I think she complained.
Really?
Yeah, she didn't like. I mean, you'd think that would be a bit discriminatory.
I can't imagine you walking back out of the lift again. You'd be we wouldn't be like you.
In How to Lose Friends and Alienate People, I'm the Toby Young character played by Simon Pegg is stuffing his face with this massive fat burger, and the Anna Wintour character comes in, and then he starts choking it, and then he sort of spits this kind of massive blob of regurgitated burger onto the back of her kind of Prada jacket, and he's about to lean forward to scrape it off, and the girl he's with kind of stays his hand, so she walks out of the lift with this burger.
Did that happen?
No.
No.
They made that up.
Miranda Priestley, I've just remembered that's what she's called. I've watched it like
Miranda
20
Priestley,
times.
that's right. Yeah.
It's a great movie. I'm sure your one's good as well. I haven't watched that.
It's not as good.
So that's my. Do you want to do one now, Tony?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of trigger warning TV program stories. One kind of obvious, the other less so. So the BBC has just put Lord Clark's Civilization landmark BBC series on the iPlayer. And it hasn't been on the iPlayer for a while. And they've attached a trigger warning telling viewers that the attitudes of Lord Clark reflect prevailing attitudes of his day, but don't necessarily reflect those of the BBC. I mean, you'd think that kind of thing would be priced in by a half-intelligent viewer, but anyway, this is the trigger warning. And they've also included a sort of an apologia from the always wonderful Dame Mary Beard, essentially criticising Civilization. I mean, this video has been put up, next to Civilization by the BBC on iPlayer, and she criticises it for telling a principally European story about Western civilization. Fancy that. And she says things like, when you're watching it, just think about what's missing from this story. Is the history of Western civilization really an exclusively European story? Greece and Rome, France, Italy, Germany and Britain. You look at it now and you think, he doesn't even go to Spain. And so this is the great Dame Mary Beard criticising the far lesser scholar, Lord Clark. Anyway, that's all kind of predictable and what you'd expect from the BBC. Slightly more surprising is that ITV has attached a trigger warning to the classic 1980s sitcom Terry and June, because it said that, be warned, it does contain discriminatory language.
It's on BritBox, which technically is BBC and ITV's joint streaming service. Apparently, I didn't know they'd got together. Yeah, it contains discriminatory language of the period. Yeah, so it contains the language of the period it was filmed in. That's the worst thing you can do, Toby. Much better to have discriminatory language of a different period. I mean, if you look at this time now, in the future, it will have the discriminatory language of the period, saying white.
Do you think that in 50 years' time, when the BBC puts up kind of politically correct, totally unfunny regime sitcoms that are produced now, will attach kind of trigger warning saying, this may contain anti-white racism, a prevailing attitude at the time.
Yeah, this may contain anti-male rhetoric and maybe a bit shit. Do you know what I mean? We apologise. Comedy wasn't allowed to be funny at that time. So please, viewer discretion is advised. You will not laugh for the next 27 minutes. Yeah, something like that. It's bound to happen, Toby. I mean, so it's so arrogant to think, oh, we've just solved everything now. It's the end of history. We've nailed it. So all past things are bad. But right now, pretty much bang on with everything.
Yeah, it's called presentism. But an example of something which may have to have a trigger warning attached, perhaps sooner than in 50 years' time, is the proms this year. The headliner at the proms, which, don't forget, is supposed to be a celebration of classical music, the headliner is Sam Smith.
Yes.
I mean, that is extraordinary. Is he going to wear those kind of...
He?
Sorry.
They. What are you saying about they? They is the perfect host of headliner of the proms, Toby. How dare you say otherwise?
It's I mean, what could be more of a slap in the face to the BBC's kind of elderly license fee paying audience who tune in because they want to see, a tiny corner of the BBC which is still devoted to classical music, to things they enjoy, only to discover that it's some awful screaming trans exhibitionist wearing ridiculous trousers and waving his cock about.
He probably will be slapped in the face during the performance. Speaking of a slap in the face, by some weird blokes or something. That's what it mainly is. And you said his again. It's they's cock, Toby. It's they's.
You say this, but you risk viewers complaining. Is what are you doing buying into this stuff?
I'm trying to provide.
Are you a member of the cult?
I'm trying to provide the necessary balance. I've been trained by Ofcom. It's they's cock. What do you say about it's they's cock?
They's cock, but that's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah.
You said it's tiny, or I can't remember what you said that because I'm trying to correct your sentence.
I think.
Anyway,
yeah.
They's cock will not be present.
Maybe not they's, but their.
Their
I
cock
think you can say their.
will be not present at the proms because they will be respectful of the occasion.
Yeah.
They will sing Britannia Rules the Waves, but just a sort of different, more emotional sort of lame version that they'll copy off Tom Petty.
Yeah. And of course, the other great classical musicians that are going to be celebrated at the proms this year is Florence plus the Machine.
Plus the Machine, is that how you say it?
I've got this written down here.
Florence and the Machine. That's the most boomer moment. Plus the Machine. Who are you, Data from Star Trek? It's Florence and the Machine.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Out of the two people, you stumbled on the name of more of Florence.
Well, I think
Florence plus Machine.
I think that is how they write it now.
Is that how it is now? Maybe I'm out of date. Maybe she's upgraded.
The Daily Mail,
world.
anyway, which is usually pretty.
But it's said and the Machine. No one says plus the Machine.
She calls she's the Daily Mail. This isn't quoted. This was directly elsewhere during the festival. Florence Welch of indie rock band Florence plus the Machine will perform her Brit Award-winning 2009 album Lungs.
Hang on a minute. It's Lawrence. Okay, it's Lawrence and the Machine, right?
Lawrence.
Stylized.
Florence.
Whatever I said, Lawrence. This is Lawrence Fox's new outfit. It's Fox Against the Machine. It's his new podcast. Smoke cigars, and this is the system. We love lots. So it's Florence and the Machine, stylized as Florence plus the Machine. You don't say the plus, Toby.
Okay,
you terribly ghost boomer. How dare you?
Back in my day, we just said what it was written on the page.
Back in my day, not allowed to say that. So, okay, what's she got to do? By the way, I forgot. I was too busy.
She's also performing alongside Sam Smith.
Well, it's going to be rubbish.
In this celebration of classical music.
Yeah, it's going to be terrible. How about this one? I don't know where to put this as peak woke or not. You had it as peak woke. I'll just do this one first instead then. Police are so cowed. I was about to do Jacoby's mob, but I'm going to do this one. Police are so cowed by the anti-Semitic mob, they even cover up the Holocaust. Now, this was in the Mail on Sunday. They got in trouble for that because it was actually not the police's decision. It was the park. But officials in Hyde Park decided to cover up a Holocaust memorial. And I said, I just got stared at on GB, but I said it looked a bit like a burqa had covered the Holocaust memorial, a blue one. But people just stared at me. I thought, is that one of those don't say it things? But this is just a new low, isn't it? Covering up the Holocaust memorial with like a pathetic blue bin bag.
No, it's incredible.
I don't know if it's too serious to be in peak woke, but I put it in there.
And you know the I think it's referred to as the Royal Parks Service. And they're officially, I think, employees of the Crown. So what are they doing, covering up a Holocaust memorial out of deference, to the sensitivities of anti-Semites?
Yeah, I know. It's much a bit like the Churchill statue having to be protected, but it's a sort of another new low in that trend. And then similarly, and it's probably too dark for Pete Woke as well, Columbia University banned this guy, Kamani James, who said that he was going to... He said, "You'd be grateful that I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists. I've never murdered anyone in my life, and I hope to keep it that way." He just sort of kept talking about killing everyone.
I'll have to correct you here. You keep referring to them as he.
Oh, you're right. It's he, she, they.
It's non-binary, I think.
He, she, they, I think.
I think he, she, they are his... Yes, he's non-binary.
Right. So what do
does that mean if it's he, she, Bray... Sorry,
right.
He, she, they, does that mean you can refer to...
It says he in the Telegraph.
He. Okay, well that's...
I noticed the Telegraph did another story where the Sam Smith story, I should have brought it here, they kept referring to him by different kind of uses of elegant variation. It was like the singer, the popular recording artist. It was like endless. They referred to him 6 times without saying either way.
Using
it was a bit cowardly, but it was kind of funny. The only time it said they was the quoting the BBC, who do go along with this garbage. But yeah, that he, she, they wants to murder. Let's get the pronouns right of the people who want to murder all Zionists, brackets Jews. I mean, be grateful I'm not just going out and murdering Zionists. Not even clear he, she, they has been expelled and certainly not arrested.
Yeah, totally unclear whether he, she, they has been suspended and told they can't step foot on campus, or whether he, she, they has been expelled. Quite a shocker. That's one of the leaders of the what's it called, the Tentifada at Columbia.
Right. Yeah. isn't it? Yeah, I mean, get the pronouns right when you're threatening to sort of kill an entire group of people. Maybe just means Zion. Maybe just the people who like Israel too much, but probably a bit of a loud dog whistle. But anyway, I don't normally use that term, but maybe it's appropriate there.
He, she, they has apologised and said that he, she, they was in the heat of the moment.
Right, probably that time of the month for he, she, they. Toby, do you want to add any more Pete Wokes?
Yes. So we've heard a lot about of things being described as far right, but I've got a couple of crazy examples this week. So a report published by Politico, the politics website, by a young lady, said that wanting the human race to reproduce is now a far right position to take. She talked about the far right being obsessed with making babies, so obsessed they just held a whole conference about it, and that was NatalCon. NatalCon was the first conference of supposedly far right people who think that actually we ought to have more children if we want to do something about the declining fertility across the West and the massive implications that'll have for society in general. That's far right apparently now.
Is that Miriam Cates and stuff, NatalCon?
I hadn't heard about NatalCon before reading about this woman's description of it in Politico. And then even more absurd, Nick, you won't believe this, but in Variety, in a piece about the comedian Tony Hinchcliffe's appearance on Trigonometry, the journalist described Trigonometry as a far-right podcast. And I think Constantine complained, and now they've changed far-right to controversial.
I think it had controversial far-right, and then they just took out far-right, so it left in the controversial.
Right.
I know, I mean, the most centrist podcast imaginable, really. I'd say it's probably centre-left, but, I say things like that. But certainly not far-right, is it?
It's not far-right, no.
I don't know if I've had anyone far-right on it.
And nor is it far-right to think that we ought to do something about the declining birth rate. That seems like almost a parody of things that are described as far right. It's like even Dominic Frisby in his song about all the ridiculous things that
we're all far right now.
We're all far right now. Even he didn't think that actually wanting to have babies would be labelled far right.
I mean, what a suicidal impulse that is. Like, hey, you want to keep the race going? Yeah, it's far right. Yeah, I mean, that's the death of an entire... That's just the end, isn't it, for everyone, really? The end. All right, I'm going to struggle to top that. So I think that's enough for Pete Woke. Decent length episode this week for the all our lovely free audience. We're going to go over to basedmedia.org for the other bit, where we're going to talk about 1 in 3 BBC journalism scheme trainees are white Britons. We're going to talk about why Labour are more popular with GB News viewers and Tories, and maybe Elon Musk in his legal battle with Australia, and we'll do Base Department. But for now, we got to go, Toby. I'm going to annoy you by plugging my other podcast, which is The Current Thing. Latest episode with Carl Benjamin is crushing it on YouTube. Please go and watch that. It's a very good episode. Many people are calling it the best interview with Carl ever. And what else? NickDixon.net. If you want to go to my Substack, lots of great articles and now extra video content like Questions with Carl. Buymeacoffee.com/NickDixon if you want to support me. I should say that slower. Buymeacoffee.com/NickDixon or NickDixon.net is my Substack. Those are my main links. Toby.
Lindsay Smith, the Newcastle United fan, who was given a 3-season ban from going to St James's Park Stadium by NUFC, with the Free Speech Union's help, is now suing. And this was for saying basically she didn't think trans women are women on her Twitter. She didn't say it to another football fan. She didn't say it to a member of the club, let alone a player. She said it on Twitter. But because she said it on Twitter, a trans activist complained, and in their wisdom, NUFC decided to give her a 3-season ban. So with our help, she's suing Newcastle United for belief discrimination, and she's also suing the Premier League, again with our help, because Newcastle United reached out to the Prem and said, can you help us, tell us a bit more about this transphobic fan? And instead of telling Newcastle to get on their bike, they farmed it out to their intelligence unit, and their intelligence unit compiled this dossier on Lindsay, which included an extraordinary level of granular detail, like not only when her birthday was, where she'd been educated, but also where she walked her dog, where the tea shop she runs with her mother is located. I mean, extraordinary. And then handed this dossier back to NUFC, which we think is a breach of GDPR. So with our help, she's also suing the Premier League. So we really want people to donate to her crowdfunder. I think it's up to just over 20,000 at the moment. But if they decide to dig in and fight us on this, then it's going to prove to be quite expensive. So if you go to the FSU blog, you'll see that on the homepage of freespeechunion.org. You'll see how to link to it. You'll see the piece about Lindsay and how to link to her fundraiser. So it'd be great if you could donate to that.
And Newcastle United is one of the richest clubs, so you're going to need some funds to take them on. But it's a great fight.
Yeah, good fight. A really egregious interference in free speech. And I think if we can win this one, it'll protect other football fans from being similarly persecuted for wrong think in the future. And believe me, that's coming if we don't win this. In addition, I just wanted to say that I did have some success fighting back against the BBC this week. You trailed that in your intro. The Daily Sceptic was libelled by Chris Packham on Sunday with Laura Kunzberg, and I'm going to be talking about that in the paid section. So if you want to know a bit more about that, then go to basemedia.org, and for as little as £5 a month, you can become a subscriber and you can watch or listen to the premium section in this podcast as well. Yes,
and for £10 a month you get the Zoom calls as well and loads of other stuff. Go to basemedia.org. I can say it. But I suppose and we'll see you in a minute if you are on basemedia.org, but for everyone else, our lovely other listeners and viewers, we'll just say until next week, stay skeptical.
Stay skeptical.